Once upon a time, there lived a young man with a sad, spotty face and watery eyes. His name was Nivellen. His father and his grandfather, too, were highway robbers. Not only that, but they raised levies on the nearby settlements as well. When they didn't pay on time, those same settlements were burned. This arrangement could never last long, as you can imagine, and one day the spotty-faced boy had his father delivered to their house on a cart, or at least what was left of him, after a blow from a two-handed sword. His grandfather was hit on the head by a morning star even before that, so he wasn't quite all there anymore. So now, it fell to the boy to lead the gang of thieves. Unsurprisingly, the thieves didn't respect such a young lad as their leader, and so they started pushing the limit far beyond what even the boy's father would have otherwise ever allowed. So it happened that one day, they rode for Gelibol, and there robbed a temple. Unluckily, a young priestess was in attendance, one who would soon regret the day, as would the robbers, because you see, the temple was not a normal one. It had skulls and bones on the altar, and a green fire burned bright. The thieves grabbed the priestess and stripped her down, telling the boy that it was time to become a man. And so he did. But while he was doing that, the priestess spat in his face and screamed a curse at him. That he was a monster in human skin, that he'd be a monster in a monster's skin, alongside something about love and blood. Using a dagger hidden in her hair, she then ended her own life. The thieves and the boy fled like the devil himself was on their tails, but a few days later, the boy woke up as nothing but a monstrous beast. In a daze, the beast started slaughtering those around him with his newfound strength, and for some reason, the house he lived in came to life to aid him in his murderous rage, until eventually, everyone was either dead or had run off in a hurry. The beastly boy was now alone. After this strange attack, the boy was left sobbing over the bodies of the people he'd killed, and he feared some of those who fled may come back to kill him soon. But nobody ever did. For a long time, the beast now sat in his house, not bothering anyone. When someone did appear, rarely, he'd make the house slam some doors or shutters to scare them off, or he'd roar loudly. But then one day, the monster boy noticed a man in his garden. They were taking a rose from his aunt's bushes, and not just any rose, blue roses from Nazaire. In a rage, the monster jumped outside and roared at the trespasser. The man begged for his life, saying he only wanted the flowers for his daughter. And just before the monster moved to throw the man out, he remembered the old fairy tales, the ones where pretty girls turn frogs into princes. So, at a chance, he yelled,
"Your daughter or your life!"
The man wept further, noting that his daughter was only 8. Now feeling bad for the man, the monster invited him inside, and when he left again, he even gave him some gold and precious stones from the mountain of loot in his cellar. The man, thankful of course, must have told others of his good fortune, because soon enough another man appeared at the monster's door. He carried a large bag for coins, and also a daughter. So the monster struck a deal with the local crowd. They'd leave their daughter with him for a year, and in exchange they were given riches. The first girl was scared to death for a while, thinking she'd be eaten. But after a few days, they started chatting and going out for walks. She was kind and smart, and when she left after the year was over, the monster was quite sad for a time. The next girl was Fen. She was small, bright and chirpy, and she was never scared at all. But even after they'd slept together after a particularly alcoholic night, the curse wasn't broken. Fen tried to cheer the monster's disappointment away by playing a game. They'd scare guests together. The monster would charge at them on all fours, with Fen completely naked on his back blowing a hunting horn. A year later, when Fen had left, Primula appeared. They had a, energetic bedroom relationship, but that still didn't break the curse. Not that it seemed to bother him much anymore. He never got sick these days, and his teeth were strong as blades. Next came Ilka and Venemira, but the monster started to get bored with the same song and dance. And quite frankly, having given up on breaking the curse, they weren't really necessary. His great health and strength also came with the added advantage of not having to fear any of his old enemies, you see. And so, time went on. Then one day, 12 years later to be exact, a witcher named Geralt of Rivia found the now monstrous Nivellen's humble abode. Nivellen rushed at Geralt in a ferocious manner, only stopping when Geralt drew his sword. He was a gigantic beast, with the head of a bear-like creature. He tried to scare Geralt into leaving, roaring violently and threatening the Witcher with everything under the sun. When that didn't work, he got upset that Geralt was not being a very good guest, to which Geralt retorted that Nivellen wasn't a very good host. The Witcher lied and told Nivellen that he'd gotten lost, so Nivellen told him to get unlost, but Geralt was thirsty and thus ignored him. When Nivellen realized that Geralt really just wasn't scared of him, he invited him into his magical house for dinner. Anytime Nivellen ordered his abode to do something, it simply did. Torches lit themselves, food appeared out of thin air through a simple spell, clothes, clean linen, hot water and soap, you name it. Now Nivellen and Geralt finally exchanged names over dinner, and Nivellen quickly realizes that Geralt isn't quite normal. Geralt was a Witcher, a monster killer. That earns the pair a moment of awkward silence. Then, after first wondering who of the two might win in a fight, Nivellen asks Geralt who paid him to deal with him in the first place. Except no one did. Nivellen is having a hard time believing that.
Why don't you say anything?
He asked indistinctly, swallowing.
How much of the rumors about you witchers is true?
Practically nothing.
And what's a lie?
That there are fewer and fewer monsters.
True, there's a fair number of them.
Nivellen bared his fangs.
One is sitting in front of you, wondering if he did the right thing by inviting you in. I didn't like your guild badge right from the start, dear guest.
You aren't a monster, Nivellen, the Witcher said dryly.
Pox, that's something new. So what am I? Cranberry pudding? A flock of wild geese flying south on a sad November morning? No, maybe I'm the virtue that a miller's buxom daughter lost in spring. Well, Geralt, tell me what I am. Can't you see I'm shaking with curiosity?
Geralt informs Nivellen that touching his Witcher medallion is impossible to do for a monster, and that the reason he looks like this is not because he's inherently a monster, but because of his spell. This, Nivellen is forced to admit, and Geralt notes that spells can also be uncast. Would he like him to try? But no, Nivellen didn't want him to. Instead, he told Geralt his story. By the end, Geralt inquired whether Nivellen was truly living alone right now, which caused a rather grumpy reaction from the beast. He'd already noticed that Geralt was listening intently and knew that there was someone else. In fact, Geralt had seen her when he came near the house, and deduced that she was the reason merchants had been leaving empty-handed for a while now. But after that revelation, Geralt noted it was time to go. But before he did so, he asked Nivellen if he was sure he didn't want his help, and finally explains what that temple was so many years ago. It was the Church of Coram Achtera, the lion-headed spider, and their curses were too complicated for most outside their circle. Nivellen seemed nervous at that, and after a while, Geralt asked what he was afraid of. Apparently, Nivellen had had terrible dreams for a while now. Dreams he'd wondered might be real. He was afraid that, in the night, he, without knowing, went out in his monstrous form to harm others. He was afraid that he was losing control of himself entirely, something Geralt confirmed he should be afraid of. Nothing could be done to fix it. And so, Geralt and Nivellen walked outside, and as Nivellen strikes up a conversation about animals, he offhandedly mentions that the girl who was now living with him was called Vereena. Vereena loved birds, and Nivellen loved Vereena. Geralt, deadly serious, told Nivellen that Vereena was very likely a Rusalka, something Nivellen had already suspected. She doesn't eat human food and disappears into the woods for days on end, and should Nivellen break his curse, he doubted Vereena would ever return to him. Finally, Geralt made to leave, but Nivellen stopped him again, asking him if he came here following the tracks of one of the merchants who'd been here recently, asking if something happened to him. Geralt confirmed it. He had only traveled this way after finding the corpses of several merchants. After that, Nivellen only asked Geralt to come and kill him should his affliction get worse. That night, Geralt camped on a high hill with his sword on his knees, but in the middle of the night, he noticed the glow of a fire far away in the valley. He heard mad howling and singing and a sound which could only have been the screaming of a tortured woman. Nivellen and Vereena were on the hunt. When Geralt went to inspect the place the next day, he found nothing but ashes. Geralt resolved not to think much of it any longer until Roach started acting up, making Geralt realize something. Horses have a knack for recognizing vampires. Vereena was not a Rusalka at all. She was a vampire. When he returned to Nivellen's home, he heard an eerie song coming from the garden. On the back of the dolphin statue in the fountain sat a little girl with pale skin and black hair. Geralt unsheathed his silver sword and spoke to the creature. "You're so like a Rusalka," the Witcher continued calmly, "that you could deceive anyone, all the more as you're a rare bird, black-haired one. But horses are never mistaken. They recognize creatures like you instinctively and perfectly. What are you? I think you're a Mula or an Alpor. An ordinary vampire couldn't come out in the sun." The corners of the pale lips quivered and turned up a little. "Nivellen attracted you with that shape of his, didn't he? You evoked his dreams. I can guess what sort of dreams they were, and I pity him." Vereena was a Bruxa, an intelligent vampire. She was the one creating Nivellen's nightmares. She used him as her bodyguard and her murderer at will, but she couldn't enslave his mind fully, so she had drunk his blood and, as far as Geralt knew, killed him. A fight broke out quickly between Geralt and Vereena. She turned into a giant bat and screamed loudly. The fight was incredibly even-sided, until Nivellen stumbled out of the house, still alive but heavily bleeding. He shouted her name, but she was no longer the girl he seemed to love. But as she got the upper hand in her fight with the Witcher, he yelled at her again, and this time she turned, only to see Nivellen jab a long, broken piece of pole through her chest. To both Nivellen and Geralt's horror, Vereena now started dragging her body towards her once lover, pushing her body along the pole. Geralt stood frozen as he heard her telepathic words echo in his head.
"Mine or nobody's. I love you. Love you."
Vereena had almost crawled entirely towards Nivellen now. She grabbed his head and tried to bite him once more, but this time Geralt was prepared. In 3 quick steps he was with her, and her head flew off her body. In Nivellen's place now sat a young, handsome, well-built man with a pale complexion. Geralt helped the man, known as Nivellen, previously a monster, to his feet, as the newly uncursed man kept touching his face in astonishment. Love and blood had broken the curse. The terrible curse had demanded the sacrifice of a loved one. Vereena had, in the end, truly loved Nivellen, and he had loved her.
I'm sure you're not surprised, but we're not doing skits at the end cards today either. I am so sorry. My Patreons are getting titles today. I hope you appreciate those too. Walguy the Illustrious, Robertson the Enlightened, Lochmoin the Fierce, MJ Coolsta the Impressive, Septic the Cattist, Mike Zweers the Unrelenting, Adrian Peckle the Impeccable, Ray the Fortuitous, Freeman the Wise,